Number one technique to make your oil painting stand out is what I call ultraglazing. Well, to be honest, I just came out with the name because it's not really a technique in itself, but a specific way to use a well-known technique called glazing. I already have 2 videos on glazing on my channel, so if you want, you can find the links in the description or in the corner of the screen somewhere. I'm not going to explain everything here, and I'm just going to explore this really cool use of glazing that I like to call ultraglazing. So first, you need to know an important property of a glaze. Due to the transparency and the natural gloss of the oil, it gives the color a lot of depth. Glazed objects seem to appear closer than normal. Therefore, it's generally recommended to avoid glazes for objects in the distance and in the background. A glaze has a depth that makes the color feel more intense than regular blends. Just to show you, let's take an opaque pigment like this yellow ochre PY42 and a transparent pigment like this quinacridone rose PV19. If these two paints are mixed directly together to form a single paste, the color of the rose dominates, but the opacity of the yellow ochre cancels out the transparency of the entire paste. If, on the other hand, the yellow is allowed to dry and the rose is glazed on top, then a very different optical mixture is obtained. So a glaze has a very special and unique visual appearance. Normally, a glaze is applied on a neutral layer, usually a grisaille or black and white underpainting. Note that the glaze captures a little bit of light every time, so it's a good idea to make the underpainting a little bit lighter than what is desired for the final look. In the case of what I call an ultra glaze, we use a cutter for the underpainting and make it reinforce itself with a glaze of this said color. The idea is simple. Paint an object with a color the normal way, let it dry, and then glaze the same color on top. I really like this trick because it really stands out. The color becomes deep and intense, really great to paint silky or velvet-like drapery with super strong and eye-catching colors. The type of thing that you don't know exactly how to define or describe it, but it's very intense in terms of color. Or you can also use it to paint objects that are glazed in real life, like this blue bowl, for example. First, I paint it the normal way with ultramarine blue, black and white, make it opaque. Then I let it dry and add a very syrupy glaze of ultramarine blue on top. I can do the same with this drapery here. This sort of turquoise is opaque at first, and then I come up with another syrupy, very dense and thick glaze on top of that to create this very cool effect. It really reinforces the color. It really pulls it forward. Now, it's not really something that the camera can really do any justice to. You really have to be in front to really see what it does. And to make it even stronger, if you want, you can separate the underpainting and the glaze with a coat of retouching varnish in between, and it's going to bring a new dimension. Some would consider this to be sort of excessive. You don't necessarily need that. And also, don't forget to use a nice gloss varnish when you're done to really make this perfect and almost enamel-like. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of technical terms that I can't cover in this video, but if you want to know everything there is to know about oil painting techniques, you can check out my course below. What makes it special is that it is a practical guide and not a simple do as I do kind of tutorial. It has helped a lot of people to get started and even explore more advanced techniques, so I'm sure it can help you as well. If you want to check it out and help the channel, you can find the link in the description below. Alright, back to the video. Alright, so technique number 2, favorite of mine, is to use Impasto to create a colored light source. If you don't know, Impasto is a technique which uses thick, opaque paint with heavy texture, often applied with a palette knife or with a large brush. Now, Impasto is tricky on a technical level because it's so thick that it takes a lot longer to dry. So there are a couple of precautions to take if you want to paint impastos. I cover it all in my course and in other videos on the channel, so I'm not going to explain what is impasto in detail. What I want to talk about is how to use impasto to paint colored light sources directly in the painting. Now, this entire thing will require a very specific type of setup and subject, very specific conditions, usually night conditions or at least some artificial light in the subject. In the past, the only type of colored light source available was candlelight and moonlight, and in our modern era, we have plenty of interesting colored light source all around us, like LED panels, neon signs, etc. So it's going to require you to somehow paint a somehow urban modern scene, but you can also paint bioluminescence, which is pretty cool. It's natural. Or you can use the transformative power of imagination to put an interesting light source in any type of setup that you can imagine. Generally, the presence of the light source is revealed through 4 factors. 2 of them are impasto. So let's see what they are from the furthest away from the center to the center. So one is projected light, and I'm not saying reflected light, but really projected light because it's a light source. So projected light on the surrounding objects. Since you're painting a light source which emits its own light, so you have to make its presence feel real by putting projected light on the surrounding object. So if you have a blue colored light source, everything around it will receive some of this blue light and will be lit by this bluish tone. And it's very, very important so that the light source doesn't seem to be cut off from the rest. 2 is a fuzzy halo. You can use glazes if you want. All around the light source, depending on the humidity of the air, there might be a soft, fuzzy, transparent colored halo, which is really cool to paint. Usually there is some type of shift in hue with regards to the color of the center of the source. Let's say that if you have a yellow light source, like in the middle, the further away you move, the more the halo will probably shift towards the reddish side. So make sure that you keep that in mind. 3 is the colored impasto. We are getting closer. As we get closer on the outer edges of the light, on the rim of the light, we can see the colored impasto. And the 4th factor is to create this almost white impasto in the center. The center is where the light is the strongest, so it really makes an impressive effect if you can get it almost white, not pure white, because pure white is sort of meh. A very, very light colored impasto, very close to white, but not exactly white. And finally, be careful about drying time with oil, because if you do that, you can have some problems with the titanium white, which dries slowly. So just make sure that drying rates are taken care of. Chapter 3, Compositional Halo. The 3rd technique is not really a technique, but more an artistic decision that you can make when you compose your painting. I call this compositional halo in reference to religious art where the heads of the saints were surrounded by, golden halos to make them really stand out from a distance. Basically, without this golden halo, there can be some distracting elements in the background, and it can be hard to really see the face or recognize the holy figures from, all the way in the back of a church, for example. So painters of the Middle Ages have found this trick of putting halo around the heads of the saints to make them really stand out. The practice somehow disappeared progressively with the Renaissance because painters had new tools to make their figures stand out and was deemed unrealistic. Nowadays, we don't have to paint saints with halos, but we can find inspiration in the idea of not putting anything distracting just behind faces. This is what I call compositional halo. It's simply the practice of conveniently placing non-distracting objects behind faces. It doesn't have to be a round shape, by the way, just a little bit of space with no distraction to take away focus from the face. It can be a flat part of the wall, drapery with no distracting texture, or even just an open sky with clouds. It doesn't need to be any specific color or value, dark or light, doesn't matter. Just don't place busy details just behind a face. So try to conveniently push them away on the sides if possible. It's not much, it's really not a technique per se, just an aesthetic decision that almost nobody should be able to notice really, but it's an important element of focus channeling, and it will make your faces stand out in the composition, just like when photographers, they blur out the background so that you see the face better, but you don't do that, except you put the busy details on the sides and leave an area, like some sort of an halo area around the face. Now, of course, you can also use the opposite effect and put faces that you don't want to bring focus on in the middle of a busy area with lots of details in the background. Number 4, cutted rim light. I love this effect. It's so cool. A rim light or edge light or kicker is a source of light that comes from behind the form, separating from the background. And I have a rim light right here. It's creating this sort of rim around my face. It's ideal to make your subject stand out because it naturally creates a line of light on the edge. And when it's done with a colored light source, you can create some really sweet effects. You can have a natural rim light with the sun, for example, when it's low in the sky and shining towards the viewer. In that case, you see a halo of warm light on the outer edges of the figure. It looks really nice. If the background is dark and if the rim light source is strong, you can create something really dramatic and visually striking, like light is radiating from the subject itself and making it stand out from the rest of the composition. Now, just to show you, I'm gonna turn off this rim light. See, so now it's without the rim light, and it's not a coincidence that this light is called kicker. It really gives the subject a nice kick in the composition. It works for all types of images and obviously paintings. You can combine this technique with the second technique we've talked about, the colored light source, and it really works well and contributes to making a coherent scene in terms of light. To paint this kind of kicker, my recommendation is to first paint the subject normally and then add the rim light almost in the end with a thick brush, just on the edge or more inside, depending on the angle, but slowly and softly fade it out as it goes towards the inside of the form. Really, it's not a complicated trick, but it works really well and makes every subject look really cool. Number 5, accent and anti-accent. You can make a painting that really stands out with muted colors all around a relatively small accent to completely capture the attention. A color accent is a relatively small area of color that is noticeably different from the rest. An accent is an accent. I'm not telling you anything really interesting here. The fact is that you can make an accent that doesn't really stand out, an accent that fails to spice up the composition. That's why I like to think about this notion in the opposition between accent and anti-accent. If you want to use an accent, what are the surrounding colors or elements is this accent supposed to be opposed to? The accent is only as strong as what it is supposed to stand against, and that's what I call the anti-accent. The anti-accent is everything the accent is not. If you want the accent to be bright and colorful, the anti-accent is going to be dark and dull. But it's not just about color. It can be a shape or a subject. The anti-accent doesn't have to be on the entire image. It can be only the surrounding area where the accent is supposed to live. It can be a compositional halo, going back to our previous point. If you restrict the area of the anti-accent to something close to monochromatic, then you won't need to use a very saturated color to make the accent completely blow out visually. Another obvious thing you can do is to use the power of complementary colors. Imagine a dark green forest with something red, like a little Red Riding Hood in the middle. The little Red Riding Hood is the accent and the forest is the anti-accent. The green, the darkness, it's everything the accent is not. Color accents don't always have to be used for the main subject. In fact, I think that they also have a lot of value when they are not used for the main elements of the painting, but rather to season and spice up the painting. Remember to always keep this notion of accent and anti-accent whenever you try to use accents. That's a very important key in how to spice up your paintings and make them stand out. And because we talked about complementary colors and color composition, but I couldn't really take the time to cover all the theory, you can click here if you want to watch my video on color theory for artists next. Thank you to everyone supporting me on Patreon. This video wouldn't be possible without your support. And if you want to check out my courses, you can find the links below. Thank you for watching. And as always, joy and inspiration to you, my friends. Bye.